Hi, everybody. Welcome back to Odd and Untold. This is episode 7, and we're going to do a little something different this week. The past few episodes have all been Bigfoot related, and I wanted to switch gears a little bit, talk more about some paranormal stuff, some ghostly encounters. And so this week I have my friend John, who I've known 35 years now.
36 years
36. Now. God, we are old.
Yeah.
We're old.
Yeah.
We are old high school friends. We've been in bands together. Well, the same bands, just different names. We are songwriting partners, music partners, brothers from another mother's. Just friends for life.
Practically raised in your home.
Yeah. I mean, we've been on vacations together. We've just, everything. We've been through everything together. And it's just great to have you on and talk to you. And I appreciate you coming on. I know this isn't really your jam, and this is one of those things you tolerate about your best friend.
I'm pretty private, but I'll do. You asked me to come on, so I wanted to come on and support.
Thank you. I appreciate it. And I was a little. As you know, I was a little hesitant to even talk to you about this. And just every time we hang out for 3, 4, 5 hours, and there's just so much we talk about and so much we never even get to. And this is one of those things that I was like, every time we started hanging out again, like more recently, I was like, I got to tell John about this. And before you know it, the night's over and it's just slipped my mind. We have other things to talk about. And, it's just, I just mentioned this to you, I think like last week, that I was doing this. Yeah. And and I know, you're very private, and especially with like the paranormal stuff, you try, like a lot of people, they tend to keep it to themselves and not out advertising it and blasting it to everybody. It's, for most people, it's a very private, sort of intimate thing that they share with close friends or family. They don't want to be on a podcast and telling about it. So I do appreciate you coming on. And, you and I have had, again, we've been friends for many years. We've hung out. We've been places. We've had experiences. We've had some weird stuff happen to us. And we are pragmatic people, I feel, for the most part. You so more than I believe. Advanced degrees and very smart. You're a great writer, very talented writer.
Thank you.
I love your stuff. And we're neither one of us are really prone to flights of fancy. We're very sort of grounded. Yeah. And when we have had these experiences, it kind of blows our mind a little bit, and, it kind of bonds us. And you've had some stuff happen to you on your own. I've had some stuff happen to me on my own, of course. So tonight, I just wanted to talk to you a little bit more about some of your experiences and anything you'd want to share. I know there's tons of stories, and my son is always asking about paranormal stories. He loves, UFO stuff and ghost stuff. And so when I run out of stories, he's like, well, what are some of John's stories? And I'm like, he would be better to tell you because he's got all the details. And I always have the gist of them. So I just wanted to pick your brain a little bit tonight and talk about some of your stories. So do you have anything really cool and creepy that happened to you that you really couldn't explain, that you'd want to share? And just as a caveat, John and I never say that this is definitely a ghost or this is definitely a UFO. Like, it's a UFO in that it's unidentified, but it's not necessarily a alien spacecraft. We're very sort of skeptical leaning, but yet we recognize when there's something we can't really explain.
The thing is that it's just so complicated. There's plenty of things that have happened to me and to you and us collectively that we can't explain. And it doesn't mean that it didn't happen. And it doesn't mean that it's ghosts or UFOs or anything like that. It's just something that has happened to us. It's an experience that individually happened to us, or we share together collectively, and we don't know what it means. We don't even understand it ourselves.
Right.
And, over the years, I'd say over the last 30 years or so, since these things have periodically happened, I've shared them with people here and there, sort of selectively. It's kind of like talking about religion or politics. You have to be careful, but, you don't want to offend anybody. And it's always nice to talk to like-minded people, but it's also nice to talk with people who have different experiences, or
Right.
who haven't had any experiences, because they're curious as well. So it's all about keeping the conversation going. So in the instances that I have spoken to people about it, they're usually very eager, either, like I said, because they haven't had anything happen to them, or because they have had something happen to them
Right.
and they can't explain it either. So we sort of share it in that way. It's like, well, this really weird thing happened. I don't know what it means. And will there ever be some sort of scientific reasoning for it? Maybe someday. Is there a spiritual reason for it? Perhaps. Who knows? I'm pretty open-minded, but as you say, I'm also pragmatic, skeptical. I don't necessarily need proof. In scientific terms, I mean, because I am open-minded and I know that science can only prove so much. So I did actually want to start off with a story, something that happened to me that was very, very odd that I shared with you at the time. And to this day, I haven't been able to explain it. But the more that I mentioned it, obviously to you and to a few people since, they've actually had similar stories. It's so interesting that people, and what I'm going to mention, I'll just get into the story and then I'll tell you about how it extends beyond our borders. All right, so it was July of 2000, and I had just moved to a new apartment. And it was so hot that July evening, that I couldn't sleep. And as I said, I just moved in. I didn't have any air conditioning. There certainly weren't any central units in the building. So what I decided to do was I decided just to keep the windows open, and the shades were open, and it basically just let in the heat. So there was no way that I was getting to sleep. So I was just laying in bed, very awake. Sometimes things happen when you're maybe half awake or dreaming or whatever. I was fully awake. I could not sleep. And I happened to look outside my window. And right outside my window, I had a fire escape. And I turned my head, I remember very distinctly, to the right. And on the fire escape, I saw something. And basically, it looked like somebody, a very clearly human form, but basically a shadow. But very well-defined human form crouching down and looking in at me from the fire escape. Now, I remember being able to see the building behind mine, because I could see very clearly through this form that very clearly had a head and arms, legs, and was very clearly crouching down and looking in on me, the head slightly turned, and where there would have been eyes on a normal person, it was basically just sort of white.
Wow.
Now, obviously, this unsettled me. I didn't know what this was. I had never heard of anything like this in my life. So what I very calmly did, not to alarm it or myself, is I turned my head away from it and sort of waited for it to go away. I remember at the time my brother was living with me, and he showed up. This was well after sundown, by the way. So he came home a couple hours later, and I was still awake because of the heat and because of the very unsettling image that I had seen outside the window. And when he came in to the apartment, I just happened to turn my head again to see if it was still there. And as I said, this was already a couple hours later, and obviously nothing was there. So I happened to mention it to you, of course, because we're friends, and
Right.
you tell these things to, and you have, we've always been interested in the supernatural, the preternatural, whatever you want to call it. And you introduced me to this concept of shadow people, without missing a beat, you had already heard about shadow people and what people had seen all over the United States, which was exactly what I had described.
Right.
Now, in 2000, this is really before I was really active on the internet, and to say that I'm active now would be a lie. I'm not active at all. I go on to read news occasionally and check my email. That's the type of guy I am. I have no social media.
Right. I know.
And so in 2000, before any of these things really kicked off, I was never on the internet. I didn't know that there was this whole belief, all of these experiences that people have had with shadow people, with seeing images basically constructed out of shadow in a human form.
Right, because I think most people, when they see a ghost, or the stereotypical ghost, when someone thinks of a ghost or a supernatural being, it's this glowing white, the sheet with the two eyes cut out, or it's the lady in the white dress, and she's sort of ethereal, and every ghost sort of glows, and this is kind of like the polar opposite. It's just like shadow people are supposed to be shadows, basically like dark. They kind of almost absorb light. So yeah.
And I mean, it was so jarring because I grew up in the 80s watching horror movies. I can remember having seen the original Halloween 1978 by the time I was 8 years old. By 1982, I had already seen Halloween. Who watches Halloween when they're 8 years old? Me. So I love slasher movies and supernatural movies, things about ghosts, all sorts of things. So that was really my introduction into the paranormal. And I had never seen anything depicted like what I had seen outside my window. So that's why it was so unsettling. And that's why I wanted to talk to you about it.
Right.
And the fact that you knew what it was already was kind of comforting and also somewhat alarming. It's one thing when you see something that you can't explain, and just keeping it to yourself.
Right.
Or you tell somebody and they're like, no, you were sleeping, you were drunk, whatever. But when you tell somebody something like that and they know exactly what it is, it's like, whoa, that was an experience for me. A really eye-opening experience for me into the paranormal.
And just to clarify for everybody like watching and listening, we were living in Brooklyn at the time, Brooklyn, New York. This is, so when you're saying there's buildings behind you, it's not some house, half an acre away. It's an apartment building, on the other, around the corner from you, and there's lights on. And, most people's first instinct, you see something on your fire escape, a humanoid figure, you're not even thinking paranormal or ghost. You're thinking someone's coming in to kill me, and rob me. Because this is a city.
I can tell you stories about that, different stories, actual people,
right?
with the neighborhood that I lived in. But that's not what we're talking about here. Yeah, right. I'm sorry you didn't clarify. I was living in these on the second floor, and in Brooklyn we have the say like 2F and 2R. So I was in here. And there's a backyard, very small backyard, and then there's a very large building right across from me. So as you see, there are windows and fire escapes and lights, and I could see people, kind of like a rear window, to mention Hitchcock. I love films. And when I looked outside, that was on my fire escape right outside the window. And I could see through it to the building behind it.
And that was going to be my next question. Like it was more transparent. So you're seeing kind of like the other apartment windows through this shape. So you knew, maybe it took a split second for you to realize like, that's not a guy trying to come in. That's something else. I can see through this thing.
Right. Which I have had.
Yeah.
I know what that's like. It was just a completely different type of alarm that went off in my head.
Mm-hmm.
Like I've seen people trying to break into my apartment from an adjacent window. Even once when I was taking a shower, someone was trying to come in that window, and it's very alarming. But when you see a person there, it's different than when you see something that you cannot explain. And
Right.
that's what I saw that night. And I haven't looked into shadow people or anything like that. Like I said, I don't have any sort of internet presence. I don't read books about the supernatural. Really, basically, what you told me was what I knew about them.
Yeah, and what you had mentioned was very sort of classic shadow person, just crouched. They usually, when people describe them, their behavior, if you will, is sort of shy or cautious. So a lot of people will see them sort of peeking around corners, peeking around doors. They're sort of crouched. They're hidden. They're you know, like they're curious or they're shy or a little bit of both. They're usually somewhat like translucent. You can kind of see through them. And they typically tend to disappear very quickly. Like or you'll see it run off really fast, like just inhumanly fast, you know. And I wanted to ask you about that. I don't think you mentioned, did you see it leave, or was it just kind of gone in a blink of an eye?
No, it was basically I was in bed and then I looked over, I saw it, and then I looked away from it. So it didn't actually even have an opportunity to leave. I mean, it might have at that point, but I turned my head after seeing it, and I had a good look at it, and then I turned my head. There were no lights on in my room, no TV. I don't drink, I don't do drugs. That's never been a thing in my life.
Right.
I wasn't altered in any way. I just couldn't sleep because of the heat. And I looked at it and it was looking in. Like I could very clearly see the tilt of the head looking sort of in, like it was curious to see what was going on in my room. And nothing
Right.
in my room except me not being able to sleep.
And that's another characteristic, is that sort of head tilt, which is almost like, it's almost animal like, you know, when you say something to a dog that it doesn't understand, it's kind of like, huh?
Same sort of thing.
Right, right.
You know, not in any way trying to insult whatever it was or explain what, I don't know what it was, but it did seem curious as to what was going on inside.
Right.
That was the feeling that I got. And I wasn't scared. I was more like
startled.
Yeah.
Yeah. Because I had a similar experience in my old apartment, and we had, you know, the layout of the apartment on 68th Street, and it had, you know, I had the rear of the apartment because it had a door, and then there were two bedrooms in the front, but they were kind of open because my grandparents owned the building. And so the front two rooms really didn't have much privacy. So when I was living there with my ex, Janine, like we would keep that door closed. And it was a similar thing where it was a warm night. I don't think it was summer yet because we would have had the air conditioning on, but we kind of had the door to the apartment open and the porch door, which was in the front of the apartment, open, just to kind of get a cross breeze. And I remember I was watching TV one night, and the door is off to my left, and just out of the corner of my eye, I see like movement, and I look, and there's this thing like doing this around the corner of the door. I could see the hands gripping the door, and I could see the head with the tilt. And it was just for like a second or two, I'm like staring at this, and then it like bolted back to the front of the house. But it was that similar thing with the head cock, and it was kind of like not crouching, but it was like it wanted to look around the door, but not fully come all the way in. So It was really interesting. And honestly, I don't remember if that was before or after your encounter, because I'm really bad at years. This could have been 2 years ago, could have been 20 years ago. I'm terrible with timing.
I always regretted not keeping a sort of journal about this with dates and things like that. The experiences were so powerful that I didn't think that I would ever forget them. And for the most part, I haven't. It's just the small details here and there. It's like who had the experience first. I think it was me. I think I had the experience first, and then something like that. This happened to you later on.
Yeah.
But I'm absolutely convinced of that. Because I figured you would have told me, and I believe that I was the first to tell you that.
That makes more sense, because then you would have known what you were looking at.
Yeah. Right. Yeah, I'm pretty sure that's how that happened.
Really interesting.
It really is interesting, and That wasn't the last time that I had seen something like that. Something very similar happened uh, many years later. So it was another summer, and I was spending it out at a girlfriend's house out in Staten Island, and she had gone to the bathroom in the middle of the night. And again, it was a really, really hot night. Couldn't sleep, no air conditioning, always no air conditioning. And this was the first time that I stayed over her place. She left the door open when she went to the bathroom. And at one, again, very clearly awake. At one point, I thought that she peeked back in, and I actually looked up because I was lying on my back. I looked up, and I was fairly certain that I saw her face. I'm like, oh, okay, I guess she's out of the bathroom. And then I just waited, and about 3 minutes later, she actually came back into the room, and I said, "Oh, I thought you came out of the bathroom before, and you peeked your head in." And she said, "No, that she had just come out of the bathroom. No one else was home. She didn't have a roommate or anything like that."
Right.
And again, there was this instance where I saw somebody looking into the room.
Mm-hmm.
And again, I don't know what it was about. I can't explain it. It was a little different from the first experience that I had because that first experience, it was more of a shadow. So it was something that was definitely darker.
Mm-hmm.
This time, it was actually something that was a bit brighter. And I just sort of ignored it, thinking that it was my girlfriend at the time.
So more of like a traditional ghost, you would say.
Yeah, right.
Like that.
Before. Yeah.
Yeah, if you want to go like with that. Interesting. So, and that was also just like a fleeting glimpse and just something kind of.
Yeah, very quickly. And I actually just thought of it right now because you mentioned your story about seeing someone kind of like peeking around the corner and not really wanting to come in. And that's what reminded me of that experience. That's what it was like.
Mm-hmm.
Sort of someone looking into the room, but not really coming into the room fully.
Right.
So, again, having had the previous experience, I'm like, okay, I chalked it up to, I don't know what this is. I don't know what this is about. I had an experience. I saw something I can't explain. And, we'll let science sort it out, or spirituality or whatever sort it out whenever that happens.
Right.
It never.
Right. And it's tough. It's tough to explain these things. And we explain them in the terms that we know in the present day. And this is why, 100 years ago, 200 years ago, you had fairies and you had
sure,
airships, and it's like, because they were just describing, I see something in the air. It looks like a ship, because there were no planes. There were no, you go 200 years ago, it's an airship. Okay.
Right. You don't have the language, because just like with me, I didn't know what a shadow person was. I just told you what it looked like.
Right. Right.
And you had vocabulary for it to explain, to at least give it some sort of definition.
And stories like that are always really interesting to me, because a lot of skeptics will say, you're seeing Bigfoot because you're in the woods and you're expecting to see Bigfoot, or you're looking up in the sky and you're expecting to see UFO. So you're seeing a UFO. I think it's very interesting when people see things that they were never aware of. So like with you're seeing the shadow figure, it's not something that's in your zeitgeist. It's not something that's like, for me, I could see people more discounting that, because I'm the opposite of you. I have whole bookshelves full of, paranormal books. And I've just been into this since I was a kid, and watching, any television show I could, any documentary I could, any movie I could. And so that was why it was interesting for me, because you saw something that other people have seen, that there was a name for, that you had no clue about.
Right.
And, you weren't seeing some fantastical creature. And, they talk about that stuff like with Bigfoot too. Like, oh, you were drunk in the woods. You're just a drunk hillbilly. And it's like, okay, well, if this is a hallucination, if this is, chemically induced, narcotically induced, why are people seeing the same exact thing? No one ever sees, the three-headed dragon. No one's seeing a unicorn. No one's seeing Godzilla. people in New York City do drugs all the time. They don't see Bigfoot. You're not seeing, no one's reporting, oh, I saw Bigfoot on the subway last night. It's to just throw these things out as like, oh, it's drugs, or it's just because it's on your mind. I can kind of see why people want to explain it away that way, but when you really dig a little deeper, it doesn't make sense. So like, how would this shadow person concept get into your head if you had no idea about it? You saw it and you described it, and you didn't say, oh, it had wings and a pitchfork, and there's other things you can sort of say that, like, all right, you're hallucinating, you're seeing something really weird. But yeah, like you said, as soon as you told me, I was like, oh, it sounds like a shadow figure. It sounds like a shadow person.
Yeah. Yeah, like I said before, I don't know if that was more comforting or more unsettling, because it's one thing if you have a strange experience. It's a completely other thing if many people are having that same experience, just like what you're talking about with Bigfoot. I mean, why is it that so many people report seeing something that fits that description? Can drugs and alcohol play a part in that? Absolutely. And, that's one of the reasons that I mentioned I don't drink. I don't do drugs. And you know that.
Oh, yeah.
We went to high school together. That's never been my thing. So why is it that people across the United States see Bigfoot? One of the things that I wanted to mention about the shadow people is I mentioned this story once to a friend I had about 5-6 years ago. He wanted to hear some sort of paranormal, strange story because, we just happened to start talking about it. And he was originally from China.
Oh, okay.
And I said, well, because as I said before, I want to be a little bit cautious. Sometimes people will just say, oh, yeah, you are crazy.
Right.
Or you are, you have some sort of alcohol dependency problem or a drug addiction or whatever, and you're hallucinating, whatever. And I don't think that's very nice. So I didn't want to experience that. I said, well, why don't you tell me something first, just to get the conversation going. And he actually told me about an experience that he had with a shadow person.
Wow.
And this is when he was living in China.
Mm-hmm.
So it's one thing, again, like Bigfoot, wooded areas, United States, shadow person, Brooklyn, New York, and also in halfway around the world in China. I mean, it was an amazing story. This was completely unprompted. I had not told him my story yet. And when he told me his story, I told him what I knew in my own experience, and he was surprised that it had a name and that other people had the same experience.
Yeah. And like you said, it's comforting in a way because you feel validated. You feel, like, okay, I'm not crazy. But it's also unsettling because then you're like, okay, I wasn't crazy. I wasn't hallucinating. What was it? Because it's sometimes it's almost more comforting to just be like, I was dreaming, or just a trick of the eyes, a trick of the mind, a trick of the ear. I saw something and I misinterpreted it. A normal thing. I saw something in the sky and it must have been a plane, even though it didn't look like a plane, act like a plane, do anything like planes do, but it had to be a plane.
Yeah.
But yeah, when you hear that other people are having these same stories, it validates it, which can make you feel better, but also unsettles you because it confirms that it might be real.
It's an interesting thing about human nature that if you see something like that, first off, just how vocabulary shapes how you think. So, for instance, if you grow up Christian, you're comfortable with the idea of angels. Other cultures don't know anything about angels. They are more familiar with jinn or fairies or sprites or whatever it is. But it seems that every culture around the world has some sort of supernatural manifestation.
Right.
Call something that is powerful, that that may exist in this world from time to time, but doesn't actually, it's not from these parts, shall we say.
Right. And that's also interesting. And again, skeptics will say that's just human nature to kind of come up with, legends and folklore to explain what we don't understand. The problem with that is, why do you have native people in North America talking about Sasquatch, but you have native people in Russia talking about similar creatures.
Yeah.
You have the Yeren, you have, China's got them, Australia's got the Yowie, all these disparate cultures from different parts of the world. I understand human culture. As humans, we may want to create something to explain something. Who put the moon up in the sky? Oh, it's God, it's Yahweh, it's Allah, it's whatever you want to, whatever your culture uses to describe that.
Name you whatever supernatural deity you have applied.
Right. But if these cultures are all attributing that there's something in the woods, why in every culture is it a humanoid, hairy, giant man? It's never a giant horse or a giant this or a tiny, and there are those legends, but for the vast majority of them, it's a Bigfoot-like creature. It's, again, the airships. People were seeing airships all over the world at the same time. And that goes back throughout history. And even before there were airships, and some people will say that, angels or even stuff in the Bible may be UFO encounters, the book of Ezekiel. We've talked about that in the past too, but
right, people being taken up into the heavens.
Right.
Several stories about ascending into the heavens that Christians are, and the Judeo-Christian tradition, very familiar with and very accepting of those stories.
Right.
Very common. Fiery chariots. What is that? It's like, well, yeah, you don't know what a UFO is because you don't have that terminology, but you know what a chariot is, and it happens to be fiery and going off into the heavens.
Right. And to outer space. It's, so yeah, it's a matter of your worldview. And like you're saying, chariot or airship or, spacecraft from another planet. And, in 100, 200, 500 years from now, God knows what we'll be calling them.
Right.
So yeah, it's all very interesting that these completely different cultures from completely different parts of the world that have no interaction with each other have the same experiences, have the same analogous mythological creatures in their folklore, whether it's ghosts or Bigfoot or UFOs, whatever it is. There seems to be
even vampires.
Right.
And this is before the internet. Why is it that all these cultures have this idea of some sort of parasitic humanoid feasting on the blood of people?
Right.
That's a pretty odd story. And I'm not saying that I believe in vampires. What I'm saying is that it's interesting how people develop these stories. And some of them just might be stories. Some of them are metaphoric. But where's the truth in them?
Right.
I think there's some sort of truth some sort of truth behind all of these stories in one way, shape, or form.
Oh, absolutely. But again, it's interesting how different cultures interpret things so similarly, not even just a little similar. It's just Bigfoot, vampire, werewolf, ghosts. Every culture has them, and they call them different things. It could be a Wendigo, it could be an apparition, it could whatever it is. These different cultures all have them, so it's really fascinating. So yeah, to go back to your original story about your friend from China, just to have that connection and to have the same story as someone from halfway around the world is really interesting.
That was really interesting, and again, somewhat comforting and validating, to use your word, and also a little disquieting. It's like, oh, okay, so it wasn't just me. It wasn't just my best friend who lives 30 blocks away from me. So it's like it's the local shadow person that comes visiting every night to different places. We're talking about halfway around the world.
Right.
I did want to add one point that I thought was interesting, in that, as I said before, this concept was something that I was completely unfamiliar with.
Mm-hmm.
So I certainly wasn't looking for it. So this was a concept that I was completely unfamiliar with. I wasn't looking for this. And what I think is fascinating is that even though it's happened, I've seen something similar happen to me twice. To this day, I will not sleep with the blinds open. You know,
Me neither.
it's not like I'm going to go looking for it now. And I know who I'm talking to. You know, I know that you go out in the field and you're looking for Sasquatch or Bigfoot or whatever, you know, you want to call it. And I think that's great. I think that's cool. It's like people who go looking for the Loch Ness Monster, or people who go looking for Champ, which is something that I might do next year because I have family who lives in Vermont.
Right.
Well, just for fun, you know, just for something different. But this is definitely something that I am not looking for, that I didn't know what it was about. It was unsettling, and I'm certainly not going to be looking for it in the future. So my shades are always down when I go to sleep at night.
Right. Right.
I'm not interested in seeing this again.
And that's also interesting because you have, you know, so many of these reports, whatever it is, UFO, Bigfoot, ghosts, so many people are not actively looking for these things. You know, people, when I was still more actively doing paranormal investigating, people thought it was so cool. Like, oh, can I come with you? You know, I want to come watch. I want to come do this with you. And I'm like, you really don't. It's not exciting. You know, you're sitting in this dark building. All the lights are out. If it's the winter, the heat is off. If it's the summer, the AC is off. It's uncomfortable. And it's 8 hours of just waiting and listening and waiting and listening. So the actual act of hunting for these things really isn't productive for the most part. It's not satisfying. I mean, it could be fun if you're kind of like that and you enjoy that sort of thing, but for the average person, it's not going to be fun. Most things that you hear about, it's people who are not looking for these things. This is, you know, someone driving home late at night and they see a weird light in the sky. Someone going, you know, I've been hiking in the woods for 30 years and never saw anything. And then last Saturday, this weird thing walked out in the path in front of me, and it was on 2 legs and it was hairy and it was 8 feet tall. These are not people who are like out looking for Bigfoot. These are not people who are scanning the skies every night looking for UFOs. They just are going about their daily lives like you were. You know, you're just kind of trying to stay cool and open your windows and open your curtains and let some that hot New York City air in. And you weren't looking for this. You know, it wasn't on your mind. It wasn't something that you were concerned about. It was the last thing you were probably expecting to see. And yet there it is. And how many hours have I spent ghost hunting and never found a damn thing? So it's just interesting that the vast majority of these stories always come from people who are not looking for it. Right. It wasn't on their mind. They weren't actively doing it. They're just going about whatever. Right. Right. So interesting stuff. Yeah. Because that Staten Island stuff that happened in an old part of, I'm not going to say where, but it happened in a very old part of Staten Island that was settled first. And I don't like going through that neighborhood to this day. It just has it's a beautiful neighborhood. It's all old houses, old Victorian homes, and it's beautiful. It's very pretty, but there's a vibe there that just, I don't know. I don't like it.
It's a very beautiful part of Staten Island, and I don't want to set foot in that part of Staten Island again.
Yeah, it's
just like my old apartment building. I don't want to go back there again. Again, this is I had an experience. I don't want to relive that experience.
Yeah, and that's the funny thing too about, you know, it's a lot of people's
fear. It's just, you know, it's like going to a concert and you don't like the music of that band. You're not going to want to see that concert again.
Right. Right.
Well, it was an experience that I did not enjoy, that I can't explain. And I just sort of carried on after that.
Yeah. And a lot of people say, like, careful what you wish for. You know, if you go out looking for this thing and you see it, you may regret that you did. And I remember living in my old apartment because there were a lot of, and we can go on for hours about the stuff in my old apartment.
Yeah.
Because that place was weird, you know, and it could be uncomfortable. It could be, you see these things and you get to a certain point where you don't want to see them anymore or hear them or feel them. And and I kind of feel that way about Bigfoot hunting. I mean, most of the stuff I do is not Bigfoot hunting. It's I go camping. And because like I said, most of these experiences are happening to people who are not actively looking. So for me, it's like, just go camping, go out my day. And if something happens, it happens. So yeah, to want to throw yourself back into something that kind of hits you is tough. And so some people do. There are people out there who that's why they get into this. It's because they've had an experience and they want more answers. And that's kind of where I'm coming from.
Yeah.
And
that's fine with me. It's just not something that I want.
Right. And that again, yeah, there's no judgments here. It's not one is better than the other, or one's right and one's wrong. It's just, it depends on what drives you and motivates you. And if you need the answers, you're going to go out and look for them. And if you're fine with the very little information you have, and you're just like, I don't want to know anymore, that's great too. It's not for everybody. And there's a lot more people out there, I think, who've had experiences than will admit. And kind of like what you were saying is you're always afraid to talk to people, and people are going to be afraid to talk to you. And it's
same thing.
People started opening up to me a lot more once they found out what I did and that I was into this. And like, I had a group and I had a website, and then all of a sudden people I've known for years, family members and friends or coworkers, all of a sudden, hey, can I talk to you, about something? Then they start coming out of their shell and telling you more and more stuff. But like you said too, even people who don't believe, that there's that interest, because they may know you and they're going to say, okay, you're not the typical, UFO witness that the media portrays, or the Bigfoot witness, or the ghost witness. You're not a hysterical backwoods redneck who's, drinking moonshine. And because that's what the media wants to put out there, is that anybody who sees a UFO or was abducted by a UFO or sees Bigfoot is just this uneducated, drunk person. And
I always think of Randy Quaid's character in Independence Day.
Yes. Yep. And that's, exactly. And they made him like that for a reason, because it was to kind of show that he was right. But that was the stereotype.
Right. It's stereotypical. People just, that's the assumption that they have about people who have experiences with that.
Right.
Oh yeah, it has to be like this.
Right. You have to be dumb. You have to be drunk or high, uneducated, and it's far from the truth, because the vast majority of people you talk to who tell their stories are highly educated, normal people who don't want to see this. Most won't give their names. Won't, I've been inviting people to come on the podcast, and people who've told me stories privately. And when I ask them, like, hey, we could come on, and no. And I'm like, look, you don't have to even be on video. We can just do audio only. I won't use your real name. Nope, they don't want to come on. So it's not an attention grabbing thing. It's for most people. I mean, of course, there's people out there who are going to hoax it and people who are going to try to exploit it. But the vast majority of people have these experiences, and they're very personal and private. And they'll tell a small circle of friends, but they're not going to want to come on a podcast. They're not going to go to the local news station. They're not going to go on a website and tell like I saw this UFO. So those stories are always interesting to me, because it's people who don't have anything to gain. And again, when you hear stories from people that you trust, that are like us, pragmatic, and just, this is not something that's running through their mind all the time. And I've had to tell people too, like, I'm far more than just a paranormal person. I'm a musician. I play video games. I write. I'm a father. I paint. I build models. Like, there's so much more to me than just being interested in the paranormal. But a lot of people think that, like, if you're into that, it's your entire world. And it's really, a small part of my world. It's a fun part of my world, but it's just a part of it.
Right.
So.
And one clearly that I wanted to support. That's why I'm on the podcast right now.
Yes. Thank you. And I appreciate that. Because again, I do know that you're very private. And
I am very private. And I've told that story to a very select group of people in the 20 so years since it's happened. It's not like I go around advertising this story.
Right.
This is, I guess, the first really public forum where I've told the story. And it's really more to support you and the podcast than anything else.
Right. And I appreciate it. And the podcast is odd and untold. So I want to hear stories. You know, my whole goal here was to get stories that are more personal. And everybody's heard about the Patterson Gimlin Bigfoot footage. You see it in every commercial and every documentary, and it's been discussed to death. And I love it, but I want to hear, you know, people's untold stories. I want to hear just the average person who, like we talked about earlier, is just going about their business, going about their day, and has a weird encounter. And I probably never told you this, but when I was doing the blog, and I still do the blog, but my first idea for this was to actually write a book. And it probably would have been far more successful because people would have been much more willing to just talk to me one-on-one, and then I can transcribe it into a book. Sure. But the idea for the book was basically just, you know, people I know. I'm not looking for anybody else. I'm just like within my family, within my friends, within my coworkers, just talk to everybody I know who's had an experience and kind of categorize it. Here's UFO stuff, and here's ghost stuff, and here's Bigfoot stuff, just to kind of show that just one person, just me, how many people do I know who've had weird encounters? And it's just about everybody. I mean, even my mother was telling me, you know, my mom.
Sure.
And she was telling me a story a year or so ago, and she'd never told me the story before, but she and my aunt years ago, they were out like in the mountains of New Jersey, like North Jersey, little town. It was like at night, and they saw a UFO, and she was telling me about this. And I don't have the details. I'll have to talk to her again about it. But just even like 2 or 3 years ago, she disclosed this to me, and I'm like, "You saw a UFO? Like, how come I'm like 46 years old at that point? I was like, I'm 45, 46, and this is the first time. And you know that I'm into this. Like, why is this the first I'm hearing about it? Whereas, like my dad, like he's told his varied stories a few times to us.
Right. Yeah.
So that was going to be my book idea, was to just kind of, you know, kind of 6 degrees of Kevin Bacon it, you know, but for the paranormal, just how many people I know who've had experiences, even people you wouldn't suspect. Like I said, you know, my mom, for, you know, would you ever expect a UFO story out of her? No, but she was telling me this just a few years ago, and she's like, me and your aunt saw something one time. And I'm like, tell me.
Yeah, really.
But the book idea never happened. I decided to do this.
Well, it's never too late.
No, it's not. I might still do the book, but I do enjoy doing the podcast. It's cool to get the stories. Did you have anything else that you wanted to tell? I know, because you're a treasure trove of interesting experiences.
Yeah, you know, there are some other things that I just want to talk about, but I was thinking that maybe we could save them for a different edition. I kind of like that we were focusing specifically on the shadow people this time. I didn't even know that that was the direction it was going to go in. But the other stories, let's save it for another time.
Yeah, we'll save them, because it's good to sort of compartmentalize and keep it just to the paranormal type stuff.
Yeah.
I'm trying to think of something, you know, and there was one time, and I was thinking about this earlier, I wanted to circle back to it, because it was a very, very subtle experience that you and I had, but really interesting. We were hanging out. It was probably in college. We were probably hanging out in your room, and the AC was on. We're listening to music, you know, probably Black Sabbath or Kiss. And the doors to your bedroom were like French doors. So they had like little panes of glass.
Oh, yeah. I remember. Yeah.
And we were just kind of hanging out in there and talking and laughing and listening to music and stuff. And there was a tap on the glass, like a very distinct, like on the glass, almost like your mother banging her keys, which is exactly what we thought it was. We thought your mother had come home.
It was actually, it was my father we thought came home, because that's what he did. My father, as you know, he's a man of few words. So just to let me know that he was home, he would always take his keys and just go right on the French doors, which were, and there was a curtain behind it.
Right.
And it was very strange, because my dad was working nights at that point. So I'm like, what is my dad doing at home? And of course I go out and nobody's there. Nobody is in the apartment at all. And very clearly you and I heard of metal keys on glass tapping against that door. And that's why we both looked over and nobody was home.
Right. And we're not talking a huge room. I mean, we were both sitting 4 or 5 feet from those doors. Like we're just kind of hanging out on the beds and listening to music. And there was just this very distinct tap on the glass. And yeah, you got up. I was like, oh, like who's home? And nobody was home.
Yeah. I remember I was sitting on my bed. You were sitting on my brother's bed because we shared a room.
Right.
And we both just looked over. I was like, who's home? And again, immediately went out. Nobody was there.
Yeah.
What that sound? I have no idea to this day. And again, there's just another experience that we had that we cannot explain. Is something very clearly happened. You heard it, I heard it, and we can't explain it. In fact, I remember after that, I took out my own keys to replicate the sound, and I tapped on the glass just like he would. And that's exactly what we heard.
Right.
Except that at that point, I was doing it. Previously, nobody did it.
Right. And again, an interesting experience because we both experienced it together. Yeah. You know, it wasn't just something like, hey, did you hear that? And I'm like, no. And you're saying, well, I heard it. And
no, we both
knew.
We
both were just like, yeah, we both
hanging out, and we both turned immediately. It's like, who's home?
Well, it's almost like, you know, if you have a pet at home and you hear something and the pet is also, you know, kind of looking in the same direction and you're like, okay, it wasn't just me who heard that.
Yeah. I have had a history of cats in my life. I was trying to remember if one of the cats was in the room with us, because the cat, I'm sure, would have done the same thing. It would have been like,
yeah, I don't remember because this had to be, I mean, we were probably 19, 20 at this point, if that.
I think we were cutting school.
Probably.
College. That's what we were doing. It's like, this is boring. Let's go listen to some records.
Yeah, we didn't go Monday. We didn't go Wednesday. Let's not go today. You know, it's Friday. Let's hang out. We'll go Monday. We'll hit it hard.
But yeah, by that point, you've already missed a week. I mean,
right.
What are you going to do? Why even go?
Was that introduction to psychology that we never, when we showed up for the final, the professor was like, who are you two?
Yeah. He didn't know who we were.
We'd never seen us before.
I remember one time we got the syllabus, so we knew when the test would be. So at one point we're just showing up for the test, and we showed up for the test, and he says, oh no, it's been moved to next week. And we just got up and we left.
I still got a C in that class.
Yeah, I did too.
I think you did too. Yeah. Good times.
Yeah, of course. I mean, what would you expect?
Right.
The level of dedication we had. We got C's, you know.
Yep.
Consequences, life. But we did have an interesting paranormal experience. I don't know what it was. I don't even know if that's the right word for it.
Yeah, and that's why, you know, terminology is so interesting, because you say UFO and people automatically think alien spaceship. Little gray men are going to come out and abduct you.
Yeah.
And the term is unidentified flying object. It's something flying in the sky that you don't know what it is. So I use UFO very easily, not meaning alien spaceship, just saying, hey, I saw something, I don't know what it was.
Right. There's something flying around. I don't know what it was.
Right. And paranormal is the same way, where it's sort of, it's outside the normal. It's above the normal. You know, like we don't have a word for it. It doesn't mean it's a ghost. It doesn't mean it's the spirit of a dead person that once lived in the apartment.
In fact, you know, I was kind of wondering, there's a lot of talk about the space-time continuum. You know, people are using it a lot in movies and literature and things like that. So what if it was actually me tapping just like I did 2 minutes later? That we heard it was like some sort of an echo, in a non-linear space-time continuum.
And yeah, that's a huge theory for ghosts, is that, you know, because the Earth is just a giant magnet. So the theory is that the Earth is like a giant cassette recorder, and it's just recording things, and it plays them back sometimes out of sequence, and we just happen to be able to see it sometimes. And it's like, it's almost like you're just watching a video, and it's the ghost you're seeing is not the spirit of someone. It's just the Earth kind of replaying an image or a sound, and like you said, like an echo, just that we're hearing something you did 2 minutes in the future. And it's just weird and we just may not have a name for that yet. So it's paranormal.
Right. That's why it's paranormal. I always think that's interesting with light, especially we have these new images, new color images of the universe that we've never had before. And these are things that are no longer there. It's taken millions of years to get here. So we're seeing light that actually is no longer there. From its point of origin, I mean. Right.
Yeah, we're looking into the past.
Yeah. So light travels at a certain speed, sound travels at a certain speed. We perceive them in the only way that humans can, chronologically. But is that the way that space and time works? And we know that it isn't.
Yeah, we're just scratching the surface of like understanding different dimensions and different, time and space, just how it works.
Yeah.
Time dilation and it's fascinating stuff, but I think it's easier for people just to say, oh, it was a ghost. It was this, again, labels, it's just what the current culture calls it.
Right. People want to understand it. People want to contain it somehow. So they name it. And it's like, oh, it's just this. And then you could dismiss it.
Right.
And I think there's plenty of people, who want to believe, big fans of the X-Files, but there's plenty of people who don't want to believe either. So you'll get both camps.
Right. And both can be equally dangerous.
Yeah.
Because you have people who are just like fervent believers, and no matter any evidence you present to the contrary to explain it, they'll just be like, no, that was a ghost. That was a UFO. No, it clearly wasn't. Like, like we've just explained this, but they want to believe it so badly. And I think that's what's always been interesting about us, you and me, just that we'd rather know the truth than like delude ourselves. I mean, I would love to believe in an afterlife, but if I can explain a ghost sighting away, okay, maybe the next one will prove to me that there's an afterlife, but I'd rather know the truth, even if it's not a pleasant truth or the truth that I want. I'd rather know the truth than to kind of delude myself and just believe something for the sake of believing it. It turns into faith.
Yeah.
And not fact.
A couple of months ago, I was talking to my friend about that very same thing that you just mentioned, faith and fact versus fact. And I said, well, if we had definitive proof right now that there is an afterlife, I would be like, yeah, no kidding. I knew that already. But also if we had definitive proof that there was no afterlife, I'd be like, well, that makes sense. And I'd be kind of sad about it, but I'd be like, yeah, this is it. So where's that line? Faith and facts. I think that's a very much at odds.
Oh, definitely.
World today.
Definitely. But it's something that has to be taken into consideration with any of this stuff. You have to just concern yourself with am I being true to myself? Am I being true to the experience? Did I really experience? And again, experiences are so subjective, especially when they happen on your own. I had a very similar experience, the door tapping one. And you know this story. I was home alone one weekend. My parents, my brothers, they went down to see friends down in Jersey. And I was probably 16, 16, like one of my first times being home alone. It was the summer and I didn't want to go. I wanted to be on my own. And I think you actually came over that night. You went home. It was probably 1:32 in the morning. Your dad picked you up.
Yeah.
And I go into my room, which is a very small room and a very thin kind of wooden door. And I close the door and I'm like pulling my bed sheets back. I put my AC on because it's very hot, wide awake, just like you were saying when you saw this figure on your fire escape. Like there was no chance that this was me half asleep, but I was standing up. And we did not, we were not cool in high school. I mean, we were, but we weren't the typical, we didn't drink. We didn't.
Yeah, no.
My first marijuana hit when I tried it, I was way into adulthood. Like I did not touch any drugs in high school. I had a few beers and, Bud or a Bud Light, which is practically water. but we didn't, we weren't the type to get drunk. We weren't into substances. It just didn't do it for us. We were into our music and playing music. But yeah, probably 2 a.m, you had just left 10, 15 minutes earlier. And, at my door, there's, this tap 3 times, boom, boom, boom. And I remember like reaching for the door because I was just so accustomed to my parents knocking on the door because I was a teenager. They didn't want to barge in on me. And it took like a couple of milliseconds to really register in my mind that I'm alone.
Right.
But there was a clear knock on the door. It sounded like knuckles on a door, a very thin wooden door.
Right.
And I reach and then I stop because I'm like, there's no one here. So I open the door anyway, because curiosity, because I'm like, because my grandparents lived downstairs, but they were not awake at 2 a.m. And their method of communication with me was to go out and ring the doorbell, make me come down to them. I mean, they're my elders. They're not going to come up to me. They would not knock on my bedroom door. They would ring the doorbell or call the phone. But
Yeah, and all of the time that I spent at your apartment, I don't think I ever saw them upstairs.
Yeah, when I was very young, my grandmother would come upstairs and like have coffee with my mom in the mornings, and they'd watch like Regis and Kathy Lee or whatever the morning show was at that point. But yeah, I mean, aside from that, like my grandfather rarely came up to the apartment. My grandmother, like I said, she'd come up for coffee in the mornings, but even that was when I was younger. That was probably like grammar school, middle school. By the time I was in high school, that had kind of stopped.
Yeah, I remember your grandfather came up. The one time I remember seeing your grandfather up there was when your parents moved out and you took over the apartment, and he was up for some reason, but that was the only time. Yeah,
I forget exactly what it was, but maintenance of some sort. He had to check something or fix something. But yeah, they wouldn't come upstairs. They would ring the doorbell, and they'd always ring the doorbell twice. Because my doorbell was like a buzzer almost. So it was bzz, bzz, and I knew that was them. I'd go downstairs and, what do you need? Can I help you with? But yeah, I opened the door on this Saturday night or whatever it was, and there was nobody there. And I'm looking down the stairs, all the lights are out. It wasn't either one of my grandparents, but I clearly heard this knock. And again, you remember that room? That room was tiny. It was a glorified closet. So I wasn't even far from the door. It was not like I misheard what I heard. And I remember that night I grabbed my pillow and blanket, went into the living room, and I wouldn't sleep in my room again by myself when they weren't home. 16 years old, I'm 6 feet tall. I was 150 pounds. I was skinny, but it's just that same sort of thing, that knock on the door. And I don't know if it was a ghost. It was paranormal. It was just something I couldn't explain. Something knocked on the door. And
that's what you heard.
That's what I heard. And there was nothing there.
And you can't explain it.
Right. And it's my objective experience. Other people can try to poke holes in it, but I can say nobody else was home. And there's no way my elderly grandmother or grandfather was going to run away from the door and run down the stairs back into their apartment in the 2 or 3 seconds it would have taken me to open my bedroom door, because I was literally within arm's reach of it. So it's just one of those, again, a personal experience that I can't explain. I'm not saying it was a ghost. I'm not saying it was supernatural, maybe just preternatural.
Right.
But it happened. So
it did happen.
Cool. Do you have anything else you want to share tonight, or we want to save some other stuff for another time?
No, well, there's actually a couple of stories that a couple of experiences that I had in that apartment that I do want to talk about. But I think we'll need more time, because it was 2 very distinct experiences, and I was not alone.
Right.
So I would like to talk about those.
I'll talk about one that actually included me.
Okay.
And you, in that apartment, because I think we'd have to get into a little bit of the history of that apartment.
Yeah, that's what I mean.
It's for your stories, and your stories are a little bit longer, but there was the one story, and you may know which one I'm talking about, but it was the one my parents had not moved out yet, but we were kind of hanging out in the apartment. And it was me, you, and your girlfriend at the time. And my living room was way in the back of the apartment. And my bedroom was in the very front of the apartment. And between that was the staircase downstairs to my grandparents' apartment. And you guys had gotten into a fight. and you went into my bedroom to fight. And
Very
I
discreetly.
discreetly, yes, you didn't want me hearing, and but you didn't want to leave, so you went into my bedroom, and I stayed in my living room, and I remember being in my recliner and just watching TV, and I hear talking coming from the front of the apartment. And I thought you guys had put the TV on real loud so I wouldn't hear, because I was like, man, either they're fighting really loudly or they got the TV on really loudly so I don't hear them fighting. And you guys finally finish fighting and come out, and you had thought that I was talking to my grandfather in the hallway right outside my bedroom.
Right.
So we both kind of heard talking. I heard it coming from the stairwell because I thought it was coming from my bedroom. You heard it from the stairwell because you thought I was talking to my grandfather on, like, if he came like halfway up the stairs to talk to me, or if I was talking down the stairwell to him on the first floor.
Right, which would happen occasionally.
Oh yeah, because again, he'd ring the bell, which you guys may not have heard in my bedroom because it's all the way in the front of the house, and the bell was in the kitchen, which was in the back. And yeah, he'd ring the bell, and I go to the top of the stairs and kind of yell down to him, and he'd yell up at me, and hey, did you do this today? Oh no, But I always thought that was interesting that we both kind of heard commotion, and you thought it was me, and I thought it was you.
Very clearly conversation in a different room.
Right.
It sounded like it was just in the same, we actually heard it coming from the same location.
Right.
And we were in different parts of the apartment.
Because I remember I asked you when you guys kind of emerged and had made up, like, you guys had that TV real loud, and you were like, no, we were trying to be quiet because you were talking to your grandfather.
Yeah.
And that's when we kind of like, because again, and we weren't looking for ghosts. We weren't even thinking ghosts. You thought I was talking to my grandfather. Yeah. I thought you had the TV loud, and it was only because we discussed it. If I had never said anything, you may not have said anything, and it wouldn't be an experience. But it was just because I was kind of teasing you about, like, oh, you guys had that TV real loud in there. And you were like, no, we were trying to be quiet because you were talking to your grandfather. And so that to me was always interesting too. Like, why, again, a shared experience that we were not expecting, we were not looking for.
Not at all.
Not at all.
We were camping looking for Bigfoot.
Right.
I was having a fight with my girlfriend.
Right.
And trying to be respectful of the space that I was sharing at that moment with you guys.
Right. And I was sitting in the living room trying to give you guys your space. And I was like, I'm just gonna let them fight this out. It'll take them, half hour, and then they'll come back out. We'll order pizza and hang out. Like, we're teenagers. The fight's not going to last that long.
Yeah.
But yeah, it was just so interesting, and that's one of those stories that always stuck with me because again, it was all auditory on both of our parts. It was just us hearing, and I couldn't really tell what I was hearing, and that's why I thought it was the TV. I thought it was the TV just being real loud and muffled from the distance and the fact that the door was closed. And you thought we were right outside the bedroom, me and my grandfather talking, and we weren't, and I was giving you your space and you were trying to be respectful of us, and there was no need on you. It was just, there was some weird stuff going on in that hallway.
It was strange.
Yeah.
Strange.
So yeah, I would like to talk more about your experiences in that apartment at a future date.
Yeah.
And we've also seen some stuff in the sky, both of us individually and together.
Yeah.
So we'll have to do a UFO episode as well.
Yeah, absolutely.
We got a couple of those stories where we've both seen some stuff. But this was awesome, man. I really appreciate you coming on.
Well, it's been a lot of fun. Thank you for asking.
Yeah. I was afraid to ask you. Honestly, I've known you for 30, 35, 36 years, and I was afraid because I know you tolerate this side of me. As we both tolerate certain things about each other. But we love each other, and we accept them.
Absolutely.
So yeah, so we'll definitely do this again.
Yeah, it's been fun. I think people should be more open about talking about it, whatever it is that is on their mind, and sharing experiences. I think it's a good thing. So I'm happy to do it anytime you want me to come on the show.
Awesome. Thank you, man. I appreciate it. And I guess we'll wrap it up there for tonight.
Okay, great.
Cool, man. Thanks again for coming on.
Thank you for having me.
All right. Take care.
You too.
Okay, so I want to thank my best friend John for coming on the show. That was an awesome chat. We just have such a cool chemistry. We've known each other for so long. We're brothers. So just a really cool show. So thank you guys for tuning in. We're going to do a few more shows. We were kind of just discussing that off air. We got some UFO encounters we want to talk to you guys about. We got some more paranormal stuff that we both experienced, and both separately and together. So those shows will be coming up in the future. In the meantime, please make sure to like and subscribe. It really helps the channel, and we'll see you next week.